Hi, I'm Gianluca Fiorelli and welcome back to SEO Session. Today we are going to talk with one of them, don't take it bad, but one of the older SEO still working in the industry and one of the most important, most relevant SEO. I tell you just three names, Majestic, InLinks, and Wakai. You probably already understood who is going to be our guest. And our guest is no one but Dixon Jones. How are you?
Gianluca, I'm very well. I'm very well. And yourself, sir?
So, how SEO is treating you lately?
Mostly great. I mean, it's being tool side, you have a different perspective to being agency side. Back in the day when I used to be running an agency, or we called it consultancy back in the day, and I found that really hard. Working with clients, well done, well done. Working with technology, I can do that and I can live with that. So as long as we still have people coming on and liking our technology, then I can sleep well at night.
Well, I mean, yes, I I agree. I couldn't be on your side because probably I surely don't have a skill to create such complex tool to be sold to the public. But yes, I can try, experiment, create my own little tools for my own use, but nothing that could be then expanded to the public. But I mean, yes, me as a consultant and all the consultant looking and watching and listening to us, surely we have to face the clients. But on the other hand, it's
Yeah.
not whether your client is not just playing with tools yours, because you have to actually then satisfy the need of a client and explain why your tool is. So
And that's sometimes it's sometimes a very difficult thing, try to differentiate Wake or InLinks or even Majestic from the other tools in the field. I know why it's different. I know why it's different. Try to tell somebody when, especially with this new AI world now, where millions of people are sort of building AI tools by just going to Claude and, saying, build me a prompt tracker. Trying to show why you're different is breaking through the noise is just as hard as building a brand.
yes, we will talk about Wakai and how is this different from the other, and how eventually, because personally I see Wakai not as in opposition with other tools, for instance, our host advanced web ranking is doing, but as a needed complement to this kind of tool in order to have a better and more nuanced perspective about visibility. But before, I wanted to ask you, you always been very obsessed about entities and semantics. I remember one of the biggest differentiation of, for instance, Majestic was not only how many backlinks from domain, how many backlinks from IP range, how many backlinks to specific pages, but you were already back in the day, and maybe was something that not too many people were already understanding why Majestic was giving us this data, is the topical, the thematic range of a domain.
Yeah.
And yeah, at the time when we started, when people, especially after Panda, and then after especially Penguin, people started to talk, okay, we need backlinks from a thematically consistent domain, external domain, and not from, let's say, for instance, I'm a pharma website and receiving a link from, I don't know, a totally different types of topic. What made you put the focus from so very early to everything entity? And
I'll
it's
tell you what it was. It was an interesting journey, really. It wasn't so much Panda, although obviously clearly that was a big thing. But what happened was when Google bought MetaWeb or Freebase, as some of us
mhm.
know it, back in 2014, something like that, less or whenever it was.
It was
Um,
before the knowledge graph.
yeah. So, but yeah,
So
the
it's
Freebase was the basis of the
2011,
knowledge.
2012.
Yeah. So that year I was going to PubCon, and so that was going to be my topic. And I knew that Bill Slawski was going to be either on the stage with me or in the audience and stuff. We used to sort of talk and stuff. And I didn't want to make an idiot of myself in front of Bill Slawski, I've got to tell you, because he was the brightest guy I knew. So I was really trying to get my head around why Google would buy this massive, great big database of ideas and things and trying to work it all through. And because they spent so much money, it was undisclosed amount, but it was a huge amount of money. And MetaWeb hadn't even, gone to market. So they didn't have a payable product. So that's how I started to think about things and look at things. And I remember doing this presentation in PubCon about a little village in the desert of Vegas and seeing how the KGID parameters were in the Google URLs and things. And then that really started to get me thinking that, of course, a link from a accountancy website to a farming website is no help to man nor beast when it comes to analyzing it from, a search engine's perspective. Context was king. And so, yes, we created all the topical trust flow with Majestic. And then as my time at Majestic drew to a natural conclusion, I kind of felt I'd done what I did there, although I still I'm doing a thing with Majestic tonight up in Leeds. But I kind of took a bit of time off and wrote the Entity SEO book. And then a guy from France, Fred Laurent, pretty much phoned me up and said, "Hey, I've got this internal linking tool and it matches your book, really." So we kind of moved into that field at InLinks. So that's kind of how it worked. I blame Bill Slawski and the fact that I was scared of him.
Well, Slawski was, we all miss still very much Slawski because it was a good grumpy guy sometimes, but he was surely bringing us clarity. And there are a few, let's say, errors in his field, but surely he's still not being equal in the clarity he was presenting things. And let's say you already started with these things, with the topical flow, topical authority flow, and then, okay, somehow by case you decided that you brought these entities. So serendipity and let's say this case of a fate bring you to work on InLinks.
Yeah.
And InLinks already was very, very strongly related to entities. And,
but it hadn't launched. So when Fred and I got together, Fred had been trying to work on his idea for some time, but he didn't have a product to put to market and stuff. And he completely run out of money, actually. In fact, he's open. He had completely run out he had no money. He had no investment. And so I kind of took some investment from my Majestic days, I suppose, and put it into what became InLinks. But yeah, we launched it together. So yeah. And then
yes, but I was meaning that the concept of substantially using internal links, not only for classic pay better, stronger page equity, link equity, the redistribution, everything, but a correct link equity redistribution between pages that are substantially about the same topics or subtopics. So underlying entities and related entities. So this is substantially what, at the end of the day, for instance, in my case, when I talk a lot about we should create topical content tabs, substantially it's very related to what a tool like InLink is facilitating work.
Yeah.
But this also means that obviously you were making the example of your talks in this little village close to Las Vegas with a knowledge graph ID in the URL. So substantially links, even if not so many were paying attention at the time, internal linking is also the best way, along with other things like the structured data, etc., to create an internal knowledge graph.
Yes. Yeah. It turns out to be really, really effective. And it makes sense when you sit back and look at any business. It has a fingerprint, doesn't it? It's literally, if you've got two barbers on both sides of the street, one's a Turkish barber, one's a traditional hairdresser and stuff, and they've got different DNA. Every person, every business has different DNA. And if you think about your business as, something with its own DNA, and then you think about your website representing that DNA, then you start to think about your business as being unique to every other business. And that's where I think the whole entity idea becomes really valuable, because you can say, right, this website is about these things, and this web page is about these things. And you can define that. And you can define that. We define it with Wikipedia URLs and with a very specific reason why we do that. But you can say, right, this page is about, hairdressing and Barton Le Clay, that's my next village along, and Turkey or something. And that pretty much defines that business, as a Turkish barber in Barton Le Clay. And that's done it. So you've taken thousands of words, reduced it to 3 concepts that all appear in Wikipedia, which are database items. So then you've given a fingerprint for that content. So now you don't need 1,000 words to look something up. You just need to go through as a search tool and say, hey, these things are, I'm looking for, this person has looked for a hairdresser in Bedfordshire. And it's like, okay, here's all the towns in Bedfordshire. There's a Barton Le Clay there. It can do it. And it's doing it with maths. And it's very easy then to see that whole vector idea of, where concepts are related to each other, both within your website and then for a user in the wider context of what they're searching for, so that, the maths of connecting these ideas becomes logical to a human and we hope logical to a machine as well.
Yes, because many times when, for instance, this is before coming to Weikai, but it's somehow related. And one of I don't know if you agree with me, many times when it comes to SEO, for instance, and the increased importance of branding as a signal, many times what I see is I can understand it for everything digital PR, but for instance, in the more restricted landmarks of SEO, sometimes I see the SEO trying to mimic or to do the job that other people are already doing, when instead of concentrating on what is the real contribution SEO, because of their technical knowledge, for instance, can bring to the relationship between the entities presented on the website and eventually also outside of the website and the brand. So translating the signals that are present in the content, for instance, into machine readable signal. For instance, a classic is how well is implemented the schema organization. Many times people forget that schema organization, they put it just there on the home page and then forget to link the idea attribution to, I don't know, the product, to the collection pages, to the person working in the organization. So don't you think that SEO should relearn how to do everything like this that I just described, instead of trying to steal the job of the brand marketers, for instance?
I think maybe I'm playing devil's advocate a little bit, just for the conversation. But I think there's an interesting thing. Certainly, you should consider your brand in context, in contact with your business. So just increasing your brand awareness out there is not something that SEOs should be doing. It should be honing in, as you say, on the messages, on the topics, on the entities that are important to the business. Now, I've got an interesting double take with Schema. Of course, InLinks, it uses Schema to anchor an entity to a page. So we sit there and a human in the loop says, yes, this page is about Barton Le Clay and hairdressing, and that's what these things are about. And so therefore, the machine can then go in and find all the times that you talk about Barton Le Clay and hairdressing and stuff on the website and link through to the page in context. And it uses Schema as a way to define the internal links. Interestingly, though, I've got no proof that the schema that we use is used in a search engine algorithm. What I do have proof in is that you don't want 10 pages about Barton Le Clay and hairdressing. You want one, and you want that one, and any other mentions of things needs to just decide what to defer to the authority page for that topic or that concept. So the internal linking is the end product of making sure that any way that you look at the system, whether there's a human, whether it's a machine, you will find the right authority page for your business on that site. Even if you've got 100 pages that are all talking about the same idea, it's obvious where that authority is. So it reduces the cannibalization, and it starts to it's like all roads will lead to Rome, and I sometimes think of links as roads, really. And so I use a schema because I need to build the internal linking system that we do. And it forces us as humans to, when we look at that schema, to be able to see things. I can see it and I can understand it and say, right, this is the page on this subject. This is the page on this subject in the context of this subject and this kind of idea. So the two map. Whether the actual algorithm is using the schema turns out to be secondary to whether you've thought through the schema as a human, because schema preceded computers, right? I mean, it came from the idea of categorizing the web. Libraries when we were kids, all those little numbers and things. That was schema. That was categorization of all the books in the library into logical topic areas. That's exactly what kind of schema is trying to do. And you're absolutely right. People put schema on the homepage of a website saying this is about this brand and this, this kind of web page, and this is the address of the company, and then completely forget about the fact that they've got authority in this subject over here and this subject over here. So it's a bit of both, I think. Yeah, we need to understand it as humans, and the fact that schema lets the machines understand it as well makes our job really unique.
Yep. What I use, because I don't want to enter into the polemics of LLMs are using schema, reading schema, whatsoever. What I really like of schema, and that's why I insist a lot about it and in implementing it, a part of it is a way to create something bigger than the schema itself, which is increasing, combining with OWL. So the triplets, you can really create a knowledge graph starting from the schema, etc., etc. But especially because it obliges us, whenever we need to create a content or specific type of content, let's say a product page, if we look at the schema of products and all the related schema like offers, aggregate rating, etc., it's giving us a sort of script draft of how the page should be structured. So it's a way to understand what elements in the page should be present that probably the machine, so search engines or even LLMs after, need to understand that a product is a product. That's why, for instance, Amazon doesn't use schema for the product pages, but they structure it in a way that is substantially replicating what the schema is clearly suggesting.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely fair. I think Andrea, so your countryman
Andrea
Andrea
Volpini, yes.
Volpini was on a thread with me the other day, and also Mark Van Merkel. So Martha Van
Yeah.
Merkel's brother or son or dad or no, a brother, he looks like. Anyway, was also on the thread, and a couple of interesting things came out. So Andrea mentioned the idea of an introverted. Okay, we were talking about LLMs, but the same sort of an introverted machine and an extroverted machine. And the idea of an introverted machine was trying to find all the entities within an ecosystem, within your business, within an Amazon or within a Turkish Barbers or whatever. And then an extrovert one was really trying to talk to the outside world or finding things that are outside of your own ecosystem. And Mark Van Merkel came in and said that the interesting thing was that when you can use open source ideas in schema, things that everybody can understand, then those two things will work. So in an internal business, maybe your product is blue screws, green screws, and red screws. These aren't all entities. Red is an entity, blue is an entity, green is an entity, and screws are entities. And then you can make up the idea. But when you tell that to the outside world, in the shop, you've got SKU codes and stuff to describe all the products, but that's just for yourself. But when you can then translate that out to the outside world, so that when somebody says, I'd like some screws to put into my red door, then it can all talk to each other. That's when you've got to try and use a common language, and schema gives that common language, I think. So, or can do, but it does depend a little bit on how you use it. But that's why we use Wikipedia. Most SEOs, when they kind of want to say, right, I want to get my brand well known, the first thing they'll try and do is create a Wikipedia page for their brand and get banned from Wikipedia. And then they learn that and then they move on, right? But the thing is, the fact that Wikipedia is so hard to get a page for demonstrates that the things that are mentioned on Wikipedia, the articles on Wikipedia, have an independent data source. And you could use other ones. You could use Crunchbase, or you can use IMDb for people, or, personalities or whatever. But using an independent data source is much better than an SEO creating an entity for their client, or creating things out of the blue for their client, because then they're shouting about things that nobody else understands, And so the trick is to say, right, all my things that I do in this business, maybe this business is unique. I need to describe these things in ways that that the rest of the world can understand. And using something like Wikipedia, or something like addresses, or whatever, or postcodes, or whatever, depends on what kind of schema you're using, allows that connection between machines.
Yes, and I think that apart, this is me, I don't know if you agree with me, but apart from the classic Wikipedia, apart all these other first tier, second tier sources for building the knowledge graph, another one that sometimes not people always say Wikipedia, but hey, Wikidata sometimes is even more important, because there is where all the connections are put, from where Google sees immediately a trusted map of connection about an entity. And so from there, you all this revolution, let's call it a revolution, but it was coming, but maybe nobody was really still thinking about the post-COVID situation, how e-commerce is boosting. Came OpenAI with ChatGPT, and then all the other. Google, the way he did it with first Bard, which was horrible, and now with Gemini, which is better than ChatGPT, but also with Claude, with DeepSeek, etc., etc. And you come out with this idea of building a visibility tool, WCAI. For the people that still wonder what WCAI means, is
what AI knows about you. Yeah, so you can't pronounce it, you can't spell it, and we don't own the .com. Turns out that uniqueness becomes really useful in trying to be visible in an.
Well, I think it's. I mean, I didn't know that you don't have .com domain, but I think WCAI.io sounds cool, and I think that it's a very parlante, we say in Italian, very speaking name, because it clearly define what the tool wants to do. So it's, in fact, if you don't, people looking, listening, and watching us didn't use it, the first thing you ask when you're creating a project is, okay, tell me what is your website, tell me a couple of competitors, and I will tell you what the LLMs knows about you, because we are going to ask you, what do you know about, for instance, this brand? And exactly that. And I like that this is giving you a first screenshot, screenshot of the visibility. I like the idea of visibility, because it's then you also, because of all the experience you had about entity search, you individuate, substantially scrape, see the website, individuate, also maybe retrieving data that you already have from InLinks. What is the website about? So you can map the topics, and then people can add more topics, and you can start brand plus topic, asking to all the LLMs.
Exactly.
And doing so, people can see, okay, for, let's say, I usually, that I'm really passionate about mini painting, let's say Warhammer, and I don't know, contrast paint. And so how much Warhammer is visible for contrast paint against, I don't know, Army Painter, against AK, which are two other brands producing paintings. And this is very interesting, because better than, for me, than getting crazy and trying to figure out using thousands of query fan out or made up conversational queries to substantially do the same thing. Because I don't think that people do just for tracking and saying, okay, I'm visible for this specific conversational query.
Well, I think they
that
do,
the
but
most,
I don't think they should.
I think that the most advanced user of these tools, of this prompt tracker, usually need a lot of information, a lot of queries, in order to do substantially what WCAI does. So in order to understand a overall indicative metric about visibility.
Thank you.
Then, yes, there are few things that can be done with prompt tracking. Let's say individuating some specific prompt that you can use as your canary in the mine. So,
Mm,
for instance, if for that prompt you were always visible and all of a sudden you disappear from
yeah,
being cited or mentioned for that specific prompt, you can say, okay, let's go and check
yeah.
what's happening.
So because we do prompt tracking. We didn't when we launched the product. We did not do prompt tracking when we launched the product because we knew that the variation of different ideas. If you say, what's the best hotel chain, it will come back with different answers every single time, and it will say depending on what you want, and it will be. But now we do prompt tracking, but it's kind of like reporting your accounting numbers after the fact. It's like your management accounts a month later. It's not telling you what to do. It's not telling you how to be proactive to make your brand more visible in AI. What we want to do is that we want to say, right, how do we know? Does the AI properly understand this business in context? Because if it doesn't, then all the rest is going to be impossible. It's kind of like the old days of getting into Google. You can get into the index and then you can rank. But if you don't get into the index, you're not going to rank, right? But the context becomes king. And it turns out that that's really hard for other tools to do because they can't build this knowledge graph. And so what we've taken out of InLinks is the same foundational technology of reading a website or reading the main pages on a website. Don't have to read them all. Getting a fingerprint of what that business does, and then getting a fingerprint of what the AI says that business does, seeing the differences mathematically, and that's how we create those action plans that say these are the things that this specific business needs to do to specifically increase their visibility in the context of this topic. And it's working well.
Now, in fact, I think this is maybe the things that I like the most as a user of Wakai is that you ask two competitors immediately. And it's not really just for competitive analysis, it's more for gap analysis. And
It is, yeah. We
it
get
is.
criticized for not being able to show 10. People want more and stuff. But actually, yeah, you're right. Yeah, yeah. Sorry, carry on, Jim.
No, no, no. I'm saying, well, what maybe if I have to give a tip to people using Wakai, it would be remember, guys, that for each topic, maybe your competitors are not the same that you put up the first time.
And you can change them now. Oh, as of a few months ago, last month, I think, you can now, every topic, you can change those competitors. So you can say, right, for
Okay,
this,
so no, yeah, that's
yeah,
fantastic.
you just put that in there. Yeah, yeah.
Because being so visibility gap analysis on LLMs, I think that is very good because it's telling you where you have to improve, what you have to defend, what you have to improve, how much you have to improve.
Yeah.
And I think you also did a very honest thing because the action plan can be assessed by
Yeah,
them.
yeah,
And I think
yeah.
this
I'm
is a
glad you saw
very,
that.
I always do that. I
Yeah,
always do this
if you're an agency, you should.
because
Yeah,
sometimes maybe for instance, since for certain client, I really know them, and so I can see that maybe like I didn't catch or misunderstood something.
yeah,
But
yeah,
sometimes when you're working with new clients, so you don't have this kind of strong knowledge. So it's always very good to do it.
So for the audience, so what we do is at the end of these reports, there's this button that you can press that you can then basically copy the report with a short prompt and then put it into Gemini or Claude or ChatGPT or whatever, and it will grade the report out of 10. By the way, the second thing you can do after that, Gianluca, is which isn't documented, is you can then say, how much is this report worth to a client? And then it comes out with a magic number.
Okay. Yeah. But actually, what I do is, for instance, when I'm working on creating content apps, topical content apps, one of the source material I give to my super specific multitask prompt on Claude or Gemini is both the action plan of Wakai with the assessment. And this is a way for me to give to the AI, let's say, a sort of first draft of what could be done and how to orient. Then I use many other signals like, I don't know, scraping AI answer for some specific conversation entity, substantially more entity focused conversation in order to use, for instance, what are the entities that the AI is already using, because they are the paramount we have to consider for the consensus. And so we can eventually use this entity expression for the AI answer in order to understand, okay, this is the consensus, but this is where we can obtain the information gain about this topic. And doing so. But one question that I have regarding Weikai, for instance, okay, you do now also offer the possibility to do some specific prompt tracking, but how you can eventually use in combination with information, the more, let's call it, eye strategy vision, but the visibility report and the action plan based on this visibility report, and along with the prompt tracking, how you can use them in combo, or how you eventually use them in combo.
So where we're working towards, the topic plans and the action plans push your content forward. So it helps you understand what content you need to write or connect the dots or whatever on your website and create hubs and that sort of thing. Then you use the prompt tracking to check your progress. One of the things that we're doing in the prompt tracking is we are using query fan out. So actually, in the individual prompts, you can see the Gemini query fan out in the prompt tracking. But we analyze those and we analyze the responses, both when you're talking about best hotel chain, then these are the prompts that you use. You don't say, is Marriott the best hotel chain? That's a silly thing to ask an LLM, because of course Marriott will be in the response. The plan is for marketing, what's the best hotel chain to take my kids on holiday in New York or something like that? And then, you want your brand to come back. So you don't ask for your brand, you see what brands come back. So we then can see all the brands automatically. So that doesn't track one brand, it tracks any brand in the results. But what we do is in those responses, we also build a knowledge graph of the topics or entities that are being mentioned in those responses. So now as the prompt tracking comes back, we're seeing that Marriott comes back with the concept of luxury, whereas Travelodge comes back with the concept of budget, and so you start to see all the underlying entities in the context of these brands. So now you get to start to see if Marriott kind of wants to compete with Travelodge, maybe they need to start talking about budget more, that sort of thing. So by taking those entities, we then build a way to analyze not just the prompts, not just where the brand comes back in the prompts, which you give to the marketing director or the C-suite.
But the attribution, entity attribution, and the entity associated.
It gives you some clues as to what you need to do next for a longer strategic process, which then goes back into new topic reports.
So it substantially is, as it was, a deep dive into what is the architecture plan, substantially.
Yeah. So we're trying to say, right, okay, well, at the start that you need to be seen for luxury hotels. So you need to be seen around the context of luxury, for example. And it's only after you've done that and you've kind of gone and then seen, how come this other brand is still ahead of us? Oh, well, they're focusing on these areas, that you can then feed back into new topics. So it does become a loop. But the way we haven't talked about in between all of that, of course, is that the machines get it wrong. And so the fact checking becomes important, not all the time, but the ability for the tool to display everything in one line. So, so here's the facts that are coming back. So
in fact, the fact that it's present when it's relatively easy to find out the fact part in Weikai, I should not be overlooked, because, for instance, it happened to me with a client, but I all of a sudden, not all BLLM, but Gemini was giving me a fact in the training data, not in the grounded data, about this brand, but totally unrelated.
Yeah.
And this helped me asking the right question to my client and asking, but what happened back in the days? Did you receive some sort of malware attack? Or because this kind of information is still there.
Yeah.
It's bad information. Maybe you had the ability to hide it from the SERPs in Google Classic Search, but we know that LLMs surface everything.
Yeah. The thing is, if you're misrepresented in the training data, there's got the real possibility of ballooning out into a falsehood in the real world at the far end, isn't it? And there's a lot of cases like that. I mean, once the AI gets it right, it's great. But if you go wrong and it gets something wrong in the AI data, in the training data, and you don't fix it, it's just going to fester. It's going to be like a sore that you don't treat. And then all of a sudden, in 5 years' time, there's going to be this story about your brand, which is a narrative that you never wanted, you never asked for, and it's just born out of mathematics. And it happens in real life anyway. So, there's countless times where we as humans go through the world and we hear something from someone and we talk about it, and then it becomes a falsehood that we think is correct. And the number of times in history that that's happened, we start killing witches because they must be bad because you can't drown them, then that's the sort of thing that happens when facts go wrong.
Yeah. Last question, because I know that you have to go. Last question about all these things. Recently, you started to present on LinkedIn case studies. So you take a brand, and I really like them because you take a brand and using Weka, you explain what's happening to this brand. One of the most recent one is the case of Maybelline. And I was particularly interested because I collaborated with a competitor of Maybelline, an Italian brand competitor. So Maybelline. So I have a special interest. And what kind of, obviously you write about certain cases, but surely you have seen many more. So what kind of patterns you see in terms of mistakes that you see also big brands that maybe are over relying on their brand visibility and knowledge you see that they commit?
Now, I don't know if this is a mistake or whether it's a foible of our technology, but creating hubs seems to be something that we never got around to doing. It's like WordPress creates tags, hubs, so categorized, so we don't need to worry about it and stuff. But we weren't creating proper information hubs about the topics that we actually want to rank for. And I see it in the biggest companies. I did one yesterday on Maybelline and mascara and stuff, and it turned out that they hadn't got that. Of course, they've got a product page on mascara. That's what they sell, but they didn't have a proper page on mascara and becoming an authority on
Well,
mascara.
I think that more than not having pages, because this was the problem of this client of mine, this competitor of Maybelline, that they have the pages. Simply they are scattered and totally
Yeah.
isolated, not
And this
connected.
is what I mean hub, I suppose, because
Yeah.
again, it's taking all that, clearly Maybelline is an authority in mascara, or should be an authority in mascara. Maybe they're an authority on marketing. I don't know. I'm using them, but it's all of us really. When you're right. The more you are an authority on something, the more you talk about it on different places, different contexts, or whatever, and the less you spend time concentrating on that one thing and showing the world that this is the authority place for somebody to go to be able to see all of that stuff. I think that hub idea is probably the simplest thing that people miss.
Yes, and that's why, and somehow returning back to InLinks, that's why internal linking,
Yeah.
apart a classic technical SEO hygiene, internal linking is maybe still and showing that is maybe the most important weapon SEO should learn to use.
It's certainly an important weapon that they should learn to use, I think. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think it gets underrated consistently.
And
Partly
it's
because it's
strange because
boring to do.
there are
I mean, if
many
you're a
people
tool like
talking
InLinks, it's
about it.
boring to do. Sorry?
Oh, yes. And it's strange because, I mean, it's not a topic that nobody's talking about. It's somehow a recurring topic. Like
Yeah.
when you always think these are the things you have to do for immigration, for instance. There are
Yeah.
always 20 years of recurring topic, and one of them is internal linking. But maybe people is not so paying attention as it should be. Or
No,
maybe
I
they
think
think
too
they
many
know
people
how to
just
do it.
think about the menus, and the thing is, the menus are, just
Yeah, they
navigation.
confuse internal linking and not understanding maybe the nuances between navigation and architecture.
Yeah, yeah. And tools like, well, sites like, I mean, Search Engine Journal, their internal linking is so strong. It's really very good, I'm quite impressed by their internal linking.
Hmm.
They don't use InLinks, by the way, but they should. But anyway, but their internal linking is very, very strong. But they're very unusual. You know, the number of even news websites who are not using internal linking, I think, is criminal. The BBC should be using internal linking so well, and they used to back in 2003, 2004. I'm really old, so back then they had a website where the internal link was already working way back, and they were top of the search engines for everything back then. Life's
Mm-mm-mm.
moved on for them for sure, but yeah, they should get back to an internal linking algorithm, I think.
And so let's stop talking about these things. Maybe just a very one phrase. Are you already thinking about other features? There is something that you are surely testing in a beta
Yep.
condition for WCAG and the links, or even you say, when all these things is fine, I would like to do this other
Absolutely. I can't tell you too much about what they are, though. But
too.
we
See,
are not stopping developing. No, no. We have been launching things pretty much every 2 to 3 weeks. Sometimes little things like that. You know, the topic that competitors can change every time you run a topic. You know, that's a materially the big change. But some big things that are coming down the pipe. We've yeah, I can't tell you the big one.
okay, okay. We will
What
live to
space?
see. We will live to see it. So stopping talking about it and just talking about you. Maybe I don't want to make you sound like the old
Oh, that's all
sort
right.
of.
I'm in my 60s, Gianluca. It's all
Yes,
right.
but I don't want to make you sound like if you were an old Gandalf type of SEO guru. But when you look all these younger generation creating tools, what is the mistake you did you would recommend them not to do?
Some of them are brilliant. So some of these kids are great, but I think that they do make. If you're asking me to say a mistake, I think there is a lot of value in proving yourself as an individual first before you dive into a tool. Because if you build a tool in an industry where you're not known, your chances of getting heard and seen are quite hard. I've certainly WayK and InLinks, and I still hope Majestic benefits out of the fact that, I have been at it a long time. Now, you don't have to be at it a long time, but you do have to demonstrate that you are respected in what it is you're trying to build and sell. And if you can't do it, you need to team up with somebody that can do that part. And that's what we've done with me and Fred. It's what we did with me and the guys at Majestic. In that, the developer doesn't want to be that front. But if you don't have that front person, then you've got a danger. And that also gives you two people knocking off each other as well. So you then become a stronger business because you don't make mistakes because you've got somebody to check your sanity. We
Okay,
got the
thank
five
you.
food.
Yes, I let you go, and I'm really, really thank you for this conversation. Surely also
Enjoyed it
our the
as
people
always.
listening and watching to us. And dear friends, let me do the YouTube the influencer thing. Remember to subscribe to the channel and to click on ring of the bell so you will be notified about new episodes of the third session. Thank you and bye bye.